You're watching NewsX, and this is a precursor to the budget 2024 that is upcoming tomorrow. And this is episode 3, and we are talking about India's independence from energy imports and what is the game plan India should carry forward to become sustainable, to become self-developed, self-reliant in our energy needs, and also look forward to creating and amassing energy to export to the entire world. Now, India's export imports grew at 44% in 2023. This is in comparison to the 2022 figures. India's energy imports include coal, coke, natural gas, crude oil, and LPG. Energy-related products dominate India's import basket. They account for a whopping 37% of the total import bill. India's energy import bill for 2023 was $260 billion. For a country to be aiming to become the third largest economy and achieving the $10 trillion GDP, it is downright essential to cut down our energy bills. How do we do it? Can we generate enough renewable energy to wean ourselves off fossil fuels? Is there a possibility of generating enough energy to cater to our domestic needs, but also build in a surplus to export it to the world? Can we really set up infrastructure to build the largest and the maximum number of solar plants, hydrogen plants, and ethanol production units to fulfill this huge goal? Is there a possibility of laying underwater power cable grids to transfer electricity across the globe? And how do we stand today as compared to the rest of the world and our global competitors on all these parameters? Let's discuss this deep dive into the subject. Joining me on the telecast is Rishabh Gulati, my editor-in-chief. And Rishabh, let's take a look at the brass tacks and particularly the comparisons that need to be made from the rest of the world and where India stands in terms of talking about imports for crude oil, for LPG and other related energy needs that India does at this point of time versus how we can potentially become a renewable energy self-reliant country and look at exports as well. We take a look at America, we take a look at China and several other countries who are in direct competition, in fact even superseding us currently.
Okay, I'm going to leave a very tiny interjection here, okay, then you can carry on the conversation. This is just about what you can imagine, okay, and then breaking it out into a step-by-step plan in order to get there. It's your largest expenditure in foreign exchange. It's the largest bill on the exchequer of India, $260 billion. Think about 2 lakh crore rupees. Now, this is a known problem. This is not a new problem, okay? So now you break it into constituent parts. India has plenty of coal reserves. We don't have oil and gas. So either you can discover oil and gas, and maybe there's a few discoveries still left. You've just seen the KG Basin, which is now going to be producing at peak about 45,000 barrels a day. You need millions of barrels per day, okay? So you can maybe find a little, but most it has to be replacement. Where is the replacement going to happen? Replacement is going to happen ethanol. Now think about it. If you're producing these many million tons of petrol, and the figure I think is 30 odd, okay? 20% now of rollout in 11 states has already happened of ethanol mixing, which means that in those 11 states, you cut down 20% of the petroleum that you require, all right? With modern cars, as they get upgraded through the general course of cycle in the next decade or so, ethanol can go up 30, 40, 50%. You have to have the ability to produce it. That reduces your percentage pie. If you can go big solar, and we are going big solar, India's solar power production has gone up 300% in 3 or 4 years, okay? It's going to go up multiple times in the next few years. So you're looking at a 5x, 10x solar power boom, not 5%, 10%, 5x, 10x solar power boom in the next 5 or 6 years, okay? We already have, I think, 2 of the world's 5 largest solar parks are now in India. One, there's being Gujarat, in Rajasthan, in Tamil Nadu, they are being built. Some of this renewable power, of course, goes into the electric grid, and this electric grid then hopefully feeds an EV revolution. Then you have to sort out the EVs. So the vision plan is potentially, and I leave it at that thought, Megha. What can you do to reduce or remove, and imagine the country you can live in if you no longer have to spend $260 billion a year and rising because our energy demand is rising. Can you potentially imagine a further country that you produce so much solar power, which you can, and then you are even exporting electricity as you've begun with Bangladesh? You can potentially lay the high power lines to Sri Lanka. You can certainly supply other near neighbors. I mean, the Europeans are planning from sub-Saharan Africa, which is Morocco, through Spain into France, to build high transmission power lines, to tap into solar power in the north of Africa. So this can be done. Now, if you can imagine it, then it's about putting the puzzle pieces together that in our lifetimes, perhaps when the decade is out, the oil bill to India's exchequer will be irrelevant, perhaps more than made up by the revenue surpluses of selling solar power to neighboring countries. Think about it. I'll leave it on that.
Okay. Mitali Nikore, having had this synopsis over what the prospects, what the potential for India is to become self-reliant and a global exporter for energy, we'll also have to look at specific developments that are taking place across the globe as compared to India's production plans, its potential, its capability currently. And an example that I give for the solar plant, solar production, solar energy production that happens in India vis-a-vis what it happens in China. So we are at 72 gigawatts of solar energy that is produced within the country, in comparison to what China produces, which is 390 gigawatts. It has, I think, 5 times, 10 times the number of solar plants India at this point of time has set up. The newest one, as Rishabh said, the Mundra solar plant that has come up, that is at this point of time in the process of being created. So, how fast do we need to move ahead? How much of our capital expenditure will be spent on setting up these renewable energy plants, whether we talk about solar energy, we talk about the ethanol plants, we talk about the green hydrogen units that need to be set up. The gestation period will also have to be considered, have to be taken into account. So, what is the estimated time we are looking at where India can become a country where energy is not just consumed, it's not imported, but is also exported?
Megha, and a big thanks to Rishabh for setting the context. So just taking off from all of these thoughts, right? The first, let's talk about solar, because that's the first question that we all have in our minds. At this point in time, where are the solar plants located? Rishabh very rightly pointed out there are a few states where you have these massive mega solar plants, right? And whenever we talk about solar, we talk about these mega solar plants. But I think we have to change our thinking here a little bit. And complementing these mega solar plants, you also need a series of interventions called rooftop solar, right? Which we have already seen a policy is recently been announced on rooftop solar. And with rooftop solar, what you can actually do is you can bring it into urban areas, on the rooftops of commercial establishments, on the rooftops of your, residential societies, for example. And you can also take it to rural areas and actually power whole villages with just, 1 or 2 buildings, which would be rooftop solar. So the rooftop solar, potential has not yet been exploited in the country because we are still talking about, large plants. So I think we have to change our approach in such a way that of course, we have large plants, but then we also complement them with rooftop solar. The second issue becomes transmission lines. And as Rishabh very rightly said, there's a whole technology around high fiber transmission lines, which we need to start, investing in a lot more than what is being done now. And in fact, a new agreement has also been signed with Nepal, to bring in, energy sort of imports from Nepal, not exports at this point, because you have water powered, you have hydro energy, which is generated in Nepal, which can also be brought in, which is also a source of clean energy. So I think we have to, the two strategies are complement your mega solar plants with rooftop solar. And the second is to complement solar with other sources of renewable energy. Hydro is one. The second is wind power. Right now we have not yet spoken about wind power, but if you go to Andhra Pradesh or you go to Telangana, you go to Gujarat, Maharashtra as well, you see these large swathes of wind power, which are coming up. Now, compare this with the UK, where in the UK, actually, if you're just driving down a normal motorway, you see like there's a whole row of small distributed wind power which is being deployed
Right.
to power up urban areas. So we have to change the model a little bit and go to distributed energy production, invest in transmission, and then move to distribution.
Okay.
And that way we can bring in clean energy across the chain.
Okay, fair enough. And talking about India and solar energy, when you have swaths and swaths of land, we are a tropical country. We are at this point of time also surrounded by deserts on the western part of our country, of our territory. It becomes very easy by putting in the funds, by putting in the resources and setting up these plants. And like it was mentioned before as well, you have these solar plants that are already installed in Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Telangana. So there is a little more push that is required to then come at a position where you are competing with the likes of China and other major solar power production generating countries. I'm going to quickly get in Abhishek Mazumdar. He's the head of the Embassy Services Private Limited. He's a solar manufacturer. And Abhishek, the market for solar energy is extremely small at this point of time. There have been a lot of initiatives that have been made by the government of India when it comes to increasing the landscape that will allow for solar energy to take over a significant percentage of our energy needs. There has been an international solar alliance that has been heralded by India. Now, how is the government of India helping out private entities who are involved in solar power production?
Sure. Thanks, Mega, and pleasure being here. Just one correction. We are not a manufacturer. We actually are into infrastructure and providing the energy services, generating our own power and renewable, right? So the quantum is almost 230 megawatt what we are handling as on date, right? Now coming back to your question, right, as Mithali also rightly said, right, it's not about only installing a large scale solar power plant or wind power plant. It's all about how much distributed electricity generation is there throughout India, right? So because until unless you start or every household start producing for their own consumption, you won't be able to supply power outside India. We are power deficit as on date, right? And last year also, if you see the data for last 3 quarters, there is a significant decrease in the installation of solar. It's about 45% decrease, right? So the push is required from the policy point of view, like they have introduced the GST, they have increased the taxes and duties, BCDs and all. So which I feel should be reduced at least for the manufacturing unit. As on date, if we see the data of total panel manufactured here in India, and the capacity is about 37 gigawatt only, and we are targeting say 500 gigawatt renewable energy itself by 2050 is not a justified quantum where we are at right now. So if you want to push this segment, solar is the best option. Reasons are two. One, India being in torrid zone, we have almost 300 clear Sundays. So every household can produce their own power, and we can start installing power plant in any state and can feed the grid. But two challenges are there. So if the requirement, like all states are not very much distributed so far solar irradiance is concerned, like the power which can generated in Karnataka, same fashion Bihar cannot generate the same quantum of power. So the interstate transmission scheme will play a vital role, which currently the scheme of interstate transmission scheme is valid up to 2025. But we have to push this and can provide some kind of subsidy or some kind of waiver in terms of transmission line losses and fees, so that every state can be equipped with the sufficient amount of solar or wind electricity. That's one thing. Other challenge is the load curtailment, as Rishabh also said, he touched upon certain point. So the load curtailment is basically, though we are in a position to supply power, but whether at that particular time grid is available to take those power or no. This is basically very much challenging stage in a state like Karnataka and Maharashtra, wherein you see the maximum installations are happening. So when we are moving towards a combination of solar, wind, and battery energy storage system, this smart grid also will play a vital role. We should actually start investing into infrastructure wherein we can fetch power from these intermittent sources, and our grid should be sufficient enough to supply it throughout the country.
Okay. Okay.
10 years
All
when
right.
it was only 5 grid system, last 10 years only we actually have synchronized all the grid. So it's possible, but push is required from the government side as well.
Samarth Kolkar on the telecast with me. He is the CEO of Be Live. He's an EV manufacturer. Now, Samarth, the electric vehicle boom that India has been awaiting for a long time now is very closely in sync with our energy production, with our electricity production, as well as the infrastructure that is required to support the EV revolution. According to you, how soon can India move forward towards creating an environment nationally to have electric vehicles plying on our streets instead of fossil fuel vehicles that at this point of time are the norm across the globe, and India is no different. Keeping in mind there has already been an increase and a considerable strong increase of electric vehicles sales and utilization in other parts of the world, including the West, Europe, US, and even China.
Correct. Thank you, first of all, for having me over. I think with any new category, three things come into prime focus. One is awareness, second is accessibility, and third is affordability. I think when it comes to electric vehicles, awareness was a major factor which we have encountered. Today, even my 11-year-old son, Rivan, would know which brand of electric vehicle is flying in front of him when he's in in his own vehicle. So I think we have crossed the first barrier of sorts, okay, of building the awareness. The next part, which you rightly highlighted, was making it accessible and making electric vehicles affordable. I think that is where the charging infrastructure plays a very, very important role. Today, you would be aware that when you look at just the two-wheeler market in India, it's a 2 crore market. Every year, 2 crore two-wheelers are sold across India. You can imagine the gamut which it causes in terms of stress on the fossil fuels which are used for the same. But when you look at it from a EV point of view, right, charging will play a dominant role. And the source of the power from where it is drawn plays a very, very critical role. I have been in numerous debates where they say that, hey, you're not causing vehicular pollution, but you're drawing power out of those coal thermal plants, right? And that is something that we have to face. But at the same time, today, when we are talking about alternate sources like solar, already, in some of the other countries that you mentioned, that transition is already happening. And I think sometimes it's good not to be the first one to make the moves and learn from somebody's best practices which are happening across the globe. And I think we are in that safe space. The second thing is that in terms of incentivizing as well as in terms of having certain compliances documented. When I say incentivizing, creating a policy around carbon credits which are linked to the source of the power that you're using for electric vehicles can be a beautiful incentive for not just the user but also for the manufacturer. That way we can see that there is some element of circular economy also implemented, because we are at that stage in our EV ecosystem where we can implement certain things which will have not just short term but also long term impact.
Okay.
Similarly, you would know that lithium, which is a lithium ion, which is a very important component of electric vehicle, which itself is being imported out of multiple countries, right? And few countries have a dominance over there itself. But when you look at it from a counterpoint of view, I think it's a beautiful time to invest in something which is very critical in the future ahead, which is battery recycling. Because so far, the government has been very clear that any lithium ion which enters the country cannot leave. So the best option for us to recycle and find an alternative way to put it back to use. So I think it's a huge amount of R&D also which we need to invest in, and we are in a beautiful opportunity right now to ensure that our mobility not just turns into electric mobility but also truly green mobility
Okay.
with
Okay, fair
implementation
enough.
of solar
Fair
power
enough.
also. Yeah.
Gautam also on the telecast. Gautam, what are your views in a situation where there are crores of rupees that have been invested into the green hydrogen mission, that is the pet project of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We see Adani group of companies setting up with these renewable energy plants. We talk about the solar park that at this point of time is being built up. The promise that India has made in the COP meetings and summits that take place about net zero emissions, there has been this massive push that has been put forth by the globe. I think by 2070 is when India has volunteered that the net zero emissions will be a possibility, will be a success from our country. And do you think it is going to take India up until 2070, which is going to be another 50 years, almost 50 years, to complete that target? And in a bit to complete that target, will it take us this long a gestation period to set up our electric grids, to set up our solar plants, to set up our hydrogen plants for a viable alternative to fossil fuels?
Well, Megha, there are two things. One is fossil fuel is ironically plentiful at the moment and is likely to remain so for half a century going forward at least. More and more fossil fuel has been found outside of the OPEC, outside of the OPEC plus, the larger conglomeration of these people with warlike tendencies in the Red Sea and in the Middle East. The dollar price is still at 80, 82. The efficiency of petrol and diesel engines nowadays is such that the emissions are really at a minimum. When you talk of the sheer quantity of vehicles in a place like Delhi and the peculiarities of its climate, particularly in winter, where it tends to trap most of the pollutants, that's a different issue. But the fact is that you're not really dealing with a very polluting, technology anymore. Having said that, so in other words, fuel is plentiful, prices are stable, the technology is pretty good. We are a big country. I am very skeptical about the technology so far of electrics. It's all right if you're going to tool around 20 kilometers up and down, or even 100 at the most within a city. It may be okay for buses, though I am worried about how long a battery bus can last, given the kind of pounding it takes, both in terms of people that use it and the maintenance, which is not too good if you look at the other vehicles, the CNG ones, the low-level buses, and so on. However, if it is put to work on public transport, it might help, just as CNG did. I have issues with electrics on multiple counts. One is what the other panelists said about what to do with the lithium. The fact that lithium itself, the production of lithium, is highly toxic. It's very difficult to get rid of these batteries. They do not last long. They catch fire. And it's expensive. Hydrogen, on the other hand, I'm all for. Hydrogen, BMW has recently announced that they've made a viable and worthwhile and exciting hydrogen engine, and they are trying to get out of what they don't think is a long-term solution as far as electrics go. I'm talking about transportation. Uh, the solar, I'm all for, but it's really, I think, better in rural areas, in grassroots areas where you plan this out properly. The grids, the land is available, rooftop. Wherever they've done these sort of small ones in villages and things, you go back a year or two later, none of them work because maintenance is a very important part of small solar plants. And it just doesn't work out because the government doesn't do it. The people where it's been installed doesn't work. Most solar lights I've seen put in, unless they're done on an industrial basis, there are problems there. But on large plantations of solar, I'm all for it. And even smaller ones, which are plugged into new communities, for example, new affordable housing in tier 3, 2, 4, 5 rural areas, I'm all for it. This other thing, ethanol. I've used ethanol petrol in Thailand. Your car's PEP goes to about half, but the pricing is about 20% less. And to some extent, there's a sort of, if you like, a trade-off between those two. Ethanol, we should be able to make more and more because there's a surplus of sugarcane, which we don't know what to do with, and it's creating problems with the farmers. So that's good. To some extent, it will cut the prices. But it's hydrogen that I really am, hanging my hat on for the long-term future.
Fair enough.
Plus,
so
solar,
do you think at this point in time, obviously, that there is going to be a future for the globe where there is going to be a complete cut down on fossil fuels, and fossil fuels are going to be taken over by these renewable sources of energy. Is that a realistic possibility that the world can work towards?
Is that for me?
Yeah.
No. In short, no. This is very nice in conferences, but I don't think in reality it's going to happen unless there is a better technology. And I think hydrogen promises to be the better technology. If that happens, there'll be voluntary adoption. But there is a lot of fossil fuel. It's not going to be wasted and thrown away. There are many countries that are dependent on it for their livelihood, a very well-padded livelihood, but that's all they make.
Okay, fair enough. Then
it's not going away.
Fair enough, you make that point. But Mithali, then quickly, before I wrap up this discussion, so how can India work forward? As I mentioned at the beginning of the telecast, that the maximum percentage of our capital infrastructure, of our expenditure that is divided in our budget, goes into buying of fossil fuel, buying of natural gas, LPG, crude oil, coal.
Yeah.
So how do we become a country that is self-sufficient, self-reliant, and at the same time also an exporter of renewable energy, or we talk about ethanol energy, or we talk about the hydrogen energy? Is that a possibility? Can we view this as a reality in the near future, or are we going to have to rely on fossil fuel that comes from the OPEC countries, and there is no running away from it?
So I think, the answer to this question has to be a little bit nuanced, right? And of course, that has to be following a roadmap, exactly as Rishabh said right at the beginning. So we have to look at what is our comparative advantage. And as Abhishek very rightly said, we have a comparative advantage in the production and generation of solar power vis-a-vis a lot of other regions in the world. So can we look at, first of all, investing more in solar? And actually, I completely disagree with Gautam, when he says that, maybe this has failed. Sure, it may have failed now, but we now have much stronger governance mechanisms in Viksit Bharat and we have many stronger governance mechanisms that are coming in the entire renewable energy sector. And to be very honest with you, Megha, what we need is women power in this sector. With Nari Shakti and with SHGs, so self-help groups that are tasked with managing solar power redistribution and solar power usage in rural areas as well as in urban areas which are slightly less to do, we can actually do better on solar. So
Okay,
definitely
all right,
solar
fair
is one,
enough.
but
Yeah.
others as well.
Okay, but nonetheless, putting a caveat that this is a very tiny percentage of the larger consumption needs of the entire country, and if we want to be an exporter of energy, we'll have to look at different other prospects and areas that can be exploited to the hilt. All right, I'm out of time. I thank all of you for joining me on the telecast.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.